Imhotep fam, namaste. Welcome to my channel. Minister Imhotep here, the one who comes in peace. Imhotep, the one who comes in peace. Wanted to talk about a couple different things. First being the concept of new thought. What exactly does that mean? And also how we apply it to urban inspirational metaphysics. Urban inspirational metaphysics. So what is a new thought? New thought is actually a term that was coined here in America. And honestly, new thought was not so much a new thought as much as it was a renewed thought. Around the 19th century, the 1800s here in America was a time of great industrialization. Lots was happening. We know that this was the end of that 19th century was the end of the Civil War and Reconstruction, abolishment of slavery, and but the Reconstruction and so many other things were going on. But at that time also there was a lot of industry that was developing. The railroads were big. There was manufacturing that was happening. That's when a lot of these captains of industry were stepping in. So there was a new consciousness that was evolving as well. Up in the Atlantic seaboard, up in the Northeast, there was quite a bit of movement by folks like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. These people had developed these new consciousness, new ways of thinking and looking at stuff. And also at that time, there was a fellow by the name of Phineas Quimby. And he was what was known as a faith healer. Some thought he was a charlatan, but there were people who actually benefited from his healings. Phineas had a different way of looking at and interpreting scriptures. He saw Jesus as just a man who was blessed with an understanding of God and how that divinity was manifested within. He developed his Christ consciousness to the point that he was able to bring about the healings of people. And Quimby also was tapping into that same resource. He was literally looking at what Jesus said about these things I do, you can do, and you will do and do greater. And Phineas took that to heart. And one of the people that he healed was a person by the name of Mary Baker Eddy. Mary Baker Eddy was the founder of the Christian Science Church. Quimby had himself introduced us to that term in an article he'd written in 1863, February of 1863. He introduced the first Christian Science term, and that's when Mary Baker Eddy actually went to Portland, Maine, and she was healed by Quimby, and I'm sure she adopted that as she developed the foundation for her church that still stands, the Christian Science. You may know their famous newspaper, the Christian Science Monitor. But that new thought movement, as I said, was really about a renewed thought, because these people at that time were exposed to a lot of new Eastern, old Eastern philosophies and traditions. They were exposed to them, so they were new to them. And that influenced how their perspective on the world also. Mary Baker Eddy was healed by Quimby, and healing played an essential role in the development of the New Thought movement, because so many of the pioneers of it had experienced personal ailments and sickness, disease, and so forth. We're talking again about the 19th century, and we had not developed many of the technologies in medicine and so forth, the advancements that we have today. So you remember that the great flu epidemic was in 1919, and so at that time we didn't even know about inoculations or vaccines or any of those things as well. So our place in history is still fairly new and fairly modern as it relates to our ability and knowledge of science and medicine and so forth. There's a great book called Spirits in Rebellion, that talks about the beginning of the New Thought movement here in America. We're considered the place where the New Thought was formed. And it's also called Spirits in Development, the Rise and Development of New Thought, the Story of the Beginnings and Growth of New Thought and Kindred American Metaphysical Healing Movements. That's what they were, really, healing movements at first, because that's what attracted so many to them. Like Charles Fillmore, the founder of the Unity Church, Charles and his wife Myrtle. Myrtle was really the one that was key and essential to the development of it. Charles, when they moved to Kansas City, Missouri from Colorado, he tried his luck as a railroad clerk, a prospector looking for gold, even had success for a time in real estate development, but when the market crashed, so did his fortunes. But his wife Myrtle came from a family that had a history of tuberculosis. Back in that day, they often called it consumption. And so she had a weakened constitution, and she was very much looking for healing at many points in her life. And she was the one who introduced Charles to these thoughts about the ability and possibility of affecting healing by consciousness, by your thoughts, by your behaviors, by your attitudes. What you brought to it affected your ability to be healed. And you may poo-poo on those things and consider it woo-woo or whatever, but actually modern science validates it. So many clinical trials, when they're conducting them, they have a medicine that has an active ingredient, and then they have another medicine, another pill that they call a placebo. The placebo has an effect because it's what you expect to happen. Now, in the clinical trials, to see if there's a difference between the amount of people who are helped by the active ingredient and then the amount of people who are helped by the placebo, and they see the difference. If there's a wide variance, then they know that that active ingredient is actually working. But again, there are people in those studies who are made better simply by taking the placebo because they have the expectation of being made better. And that's what it reveals about the power of our thought, the power of our consciousness, the power of the human mind to affect healing within, based off just expectation, belief, and the faith that it will happen. So many of these movements were based off of the healing. Even Dr. Barbara King, the bishop who ordained me, she suffered from tuberculosis early in life, and she also prayed the prayers of protection and of healing and so forth, and that affected her healing, and it actually worked. And so many of the people in this New Thought movement were attracted by Jesus's teachings of healing, those things that happened in the Bible. And it's consistent because you may remember the story who had the woman who had the issues of blood for like 30-something odd years. I'm assuming that's like a severe menstrual bleeding, that she had this prolonged period. And she had the thought that if she could but touch the hem of Jesus's garment, she would be made whole. She would be healed. That was her plan. That was her thought. She did not consult Jesus about that in advance, but she reached out and touched, and it affected a healing because that was her belief. That was her expectation, and she had faith in it. And that's why he was able to feel that surge of power being released from him, because that's what she had made up her mind was would heal her. You remember even in many of those others healings, like the man who was there waiting at the pool by Bethesda to be placed in when the water was stirred. Jesus asked him the one question: do you want to be healed? What is it that you want from me? Do you want to be healed? And if he was able to answer yes to that and just told him to pick up his bed and walk, and he was able to do it. It is the desire that is within. It is the thought of the possibility and the expectation that it can happen that creates the magic that allows it to happen. And many of these things that we consider magical or and so forth, at that time, like even the possibility of me speaking to you on this device right here would have been considered magical 2,000 years ago. It's mundane and ordinary now. Everybody has access to it. We have more power on our phones than the people who actually took the moonshot and went to the moon. We have that computer power to us. But that just shows you how consciousness evolves over time. Our beliefs can evolve over time. What we're exposed to evolves over time because our knowledge base evolves over time. It grows and expands. And the things that we're able to do now, as I said, that would seem magical 2,000 years ago, just imagine what we might consider magical today, and 2,000 years in the future, what will seem commonplace and ordinary and, just available to anyone, access to anyone. So we have to allow for that in our thinking about religion, philosophy, theology, and all those things as well. Our concept and understanding of the divine, of the universal, of the God mind, if you will, and all those things, the fountainhead. Our understanding of that changes and evolves over time too. It does not stay static. Life moves on. But there are truths. There's knowledge. There's and of those basic truths, those foundational truths that remains. There are principles, laws, spiritual laws, universal laws, physical laws that remain the same, that remain constant and immutable, like the law of attraction, the law of consequences, the law of mentalism. Some of these are Hermetic thoughts. Some of them are Kabbalistic thoughts. But the basic truths are essential and continue throughout time. And that's why I say it's not new thought that they were serving up, but it was a renewed thought going back to the essential essence of many of the teachings that Jesus taught, because we have to also know that they did not originate with Jesus, that many of these things that he taught were lessons that he had learned, which were passed down from time immemorial. Because Jesus was also had the ability to be exposed to the teachings of the ancient Egyptian mystery schools, the Kemetic mystery schools. You remember that as an infant, in order to flee from the murderous plans of King Herod, Jesus' family fled to Egypt to hide out. Now again, you don't run and hide out in a place where you're going to stand out. You go where you're going to blend in. So obviously we're talking about a story of these Afro-Asiatic people who were a part of Northeast Africa. It was all considered one landmass. It was all a part of the same thing. So they went to Egypt. And between the years of 12 and 30, there is no real biblical scriptural documentation of what Jesus learned or was exposed to or any of those things. So it is fairly conceivable and perhaps likely improbable that he was exposed to many of the mystery teachings of ancient Egypt. There's also a legend that shows that talks about Jesus being visiting Kashmir over near India and being a part of that culture as well. So he could have been exposed to Buddhist and Hindu teachings also. Well, Hindu teachings, because that predated the Buddha. But Jesus could have been exposed to those things also. We don't know. But what we do know is there is a certain consistency with the lessons that are taught from those ancients, that ageless, and also what was taught by Jesus, and then what was sort of rediscovered by folks like Quimby and Eddy and so forth, and all those who were pioneers, the Fillmores of this new thought, this new way of thinking about Jesus's ministry and message. And that's why it was formed the basis of what they call New Thought Christianity, New Thought. Some of the basic tenets of New Thought state that ideals are reality, or in other words, you may say thoughts are things. Our thoughts become substantive. They actually can come into expression as above, so below, and that's how the Kabbalists looked at it. That's what the Star of David represents, those two overlapping pyramids, one ascending, one descending, that as we think, it also is expressed in our experience. And they also, New Thought, one of the other tenets is about a divine humanity, that the divinity resides within us, that we are divine beings, we're spiritual beings having a human experience, and that we are all divine as well as being all human. And you may look at it as with the ocean, and taking a cup full of the ocean, dipping it into the ocean, and what you have within that cup is 100% ocean, but it is not the totality of the ocean. And just as we are divine, we are not the totality of the divinity. And so the aspects of God, the personalities of God that we look and acknowledge and ascribe to him, being, omniscient, omnipresent, and all those things, we have certain elements of those within us as well, because we are a part of the divinity. And that's why when the scriptures in Genesis 1st chapter 27 talks about being made in the image and likeness of God, we're not talking about physical resemblance. We're talking about the resemblance of the constitution, that the consistency of what makes us up, what formed us. Those elements, those stardust particles that were created at the Big Bang, all of those things are a part of us as well. And that's when we look at modern technology, the things that allow us to, the rare earth minerals that allow us to create electrical vehicles and cell phones and all of these things. Those things have been around since the very beginning. But as man began to develop and understand and how to compile that collective information and culture to create those things. And there have been civilizations before us. We still don't understand how the pyramids were built with all of our modern technology. We can't replicate that and construct them right now with the precision, the laser precision that they were developed. And we see that all around the world. Around that the same area around, I think it's the 44th parallel or something like that, but that's where all of these pyramids and temples and so forth, that were these giant monolithic pieces of blocks of stone, were used and created to such precise detail that they didn't even have to use mortar or cement or anything to hold them together. And you can't even slip a piece of paper between them. That's how tight it is, and that's how precise it is. How were they able to do that? Because the ancients were observant. The ancients would look to the stars. They would look to the skies. They would look to the solar system, and they got a lot of answers from being able to garnered knowledge from what was going on around them. Whether or not someone else helped to facilitate that, there are many theories about the Anunnaki and so forth, and we're not going to get into any of those conversations or discussions right now, although those are very rich conversations to have. What we're talking about just right now is about the whole concept of new thought, and how these people here in America, 19th century America, the 1800s, began to look back and see that what they had been instructed and taught as traditional religion was lacking in some things. And in truth, it's not even the religion that Jesus recognized. Jesus never considered himself a Christian. He didn't come to create a new religion. If anything, he may have saw himself as a part of a new sect of Judaism, but it wasn't even that, because for the most part, he said he was just coming to fulfill what had already been prophesied and written. But his understanding in that new dispensation that he brought led people to think for themselves in new ways, to think new thoughts. You think a new thought, it leads to a new action. That new action produces a new consequence or result. And so that's a part of that whole new thought philosophy, is that if we can get back to the way that Jesus actually instructed his disciples, what he taught about healing, what he spoke, what he demonstrated, then maybe that we can affect some of that in our lives as well, and bring his prophecy to fruition, that we could do greater things even than he did. So that's the basis of the new thought portion of what I wanted to talk about. The renewed thought. Nothing new in the universe. Nothing new thoughts, new consciousness. We all tap into something that exists. You may have even had that thought yourself. You thought you had an original idea. You look to reserve your URL, and you see that somebody else already has it. You had a new product idea. You look to patent it, and you see that somebody already has a patent on it from 10 years ago. It's because we are a part of that same ethers, that the same divine mind, and we can tap into it, and we can pull out those things that allow us to move forward. So we're not talking about a new thought, but a renewed thought that was taking place here in the Americas. Uh, and now, when I talk about urban inspirational metaphysics, what I'm really talking about is we can break down those words urban. We know that euphemistically we use that word often to refer to black folk. There's urban music, there's urban wear, urban garments, urban gear, urban this, urban that, and usually you are talking about black folks of a certain age and attitude, those who were maybe raised in the hip hop generation who have that as a common base of reference. And so we also tap into that same sort of mindset with urban in terms of things that are relevant to young black and brown and people of color today, how we relate to these things. We talked about what was happening in the 18th and hundreds in the 19th century. We know that a big part of that was our emancipation and release from the legal bonds of slavery, but we know that we went through many periods and are still going through some things where we are dealing with the effects of that. We still have to have some real conversations about that, you know, reparations and all those things. How do you compensate for those things that have happened? But anyway, that is sort of the basic foundation of what was happening at that time as they were going through it. So their understandings are also colored by the culture in which they were raised. And so although they were very free-thinking people, I'm sure the system of racism also permeated everything, and it had to have effects in terms of how they dealt with, processed, and understood the world as well. So what we like to do now is bring contemporary examples to these ancient and ageless truths to break it down in a way that people can today can get some understanding from it and some application for their lives as they experience them here in this modern urban context of where we are. Inspirational, the second word in the phrase, is that we want to inspire people to their highest height. The ageless ancients inscribed on the temples, know thyself. And that self-knowledge is what we want to inspire people to go on a journey to learn about themselves, to seek that knowledge of themselves, to seek that understanding, so that once they know who they are and know that they are divine, having that human experience, we can recognize that divinity in others. And that's when we can treat others according to that golden rule as we would like to be treated, as we expect to be treated. Love thy neighbor as thyself. And I think that's really also a statement of truth. It's a commandment, but it's a statement. We can only love others as we love ourselves. And that's why we see so many people with self-hatred and those things where they have low self-esteem and low self-image, and they project that out onto others, and that's why they're able to do harm to others. That's why they're able to see others as threats and so forth, because they haven't developed a sense of self to understand themselves, to love themselves, and to be able to apply that to love thy neighbor as thyself, as yourself. And so that's what we try to instill, that inspiring people, to touch people, to provoke thought. And hopefully when we provoke that thought and inspire them, we can transform lives. That's the metaphysical part of this. That's the alchemy that we want to see happen. Metaphysics, literally in the Greek, means going beyond the physics. Meta, beyond. Physics, the physical nature of the world, the physical structure. We can take it as we relate to Scripture as going beyond the literal, not just looking at the letter, but the intent behind it and what was meant. Because Jesus and the ancients, the Cometics, the Mayans, they all also had esoteric knowledge, and so that's how they spoke as well. That's how they taught parables and so forth that had different levels of meaning and understanding. You can get it on one level, but there were always deeper levels. When Jesus said, in my Father's house are many mansions, talking about many rooms of consciousness, many elevations. There are levels to this thing, we might say. And in fact, there are levels to it. There are levels to the stories. There are levels to the teachings. And when we gain those understandings, it elevates us. So we go beyond the physical. So we're urban, we're inspirational, and we're metaphysical. And when we take that approach, that philosophical approach to looking at the scriptures, it opens up whole new worlds of meaning and whole new worlds of relevance and whole new worlds of application, and how we can take these things when we look at the scriptures and see that every person and place that's named within those scriptures reveals some sort of aspect of ourselves. And that's what it's really about. When you know about the Hebrew language, Aramaic and so forth, and Hebrew, and many of the ancient languages, the alphabet itself was constructed in a way that there were numerical meanings to it. There were different symbologies and numerical meanings to the thing. So the words weren't willy-nilly and thrown together, but even those basic words had a meaning itself, different levels of meaning. And that's what we're opening ourselves to in this study and this channel, as we talk about those various levels of meaning and how they apply to ourselves and how we make them contemporary. We're taking it from a hip-hop perspective. Hip-hop meaning, or you can interpret it as higher infinite power healing our people. But so often hip-hop has been used to harm our people. And we want to take it back to some of that original intent and create our own mythologies about and instructions and legends and so forth about how we can control our own destiny. Instead of just his story, we're taking our story and making it my story so that we can talk about what it is that influences and affects us and brings about a change as we recognize our divinity and how we can, in fact, tap into our higher consciousness, our higher infinite power, and use that to heal our people as opposed to harming them. You remember there was one period of time in hip hop when there was a great emphasis on consciousness. We had those from, the native tongues and so forth, Public Enemy, KRS-One, and many other who put consciousness and with intention into their lyrics. And then it was sort of co-opted by those who saw more commercial success possible by infusing a little bit more gangsterism into it. And there was not anything necessarily wrong, because even some of those original groups, even though they espoused it in ways that they were labeled as gangster rappers, what they were talking about were conditions that were real in their communities. But when things got out of balance and out of harmony, when so much emphasis was placed on the negative as opposed to making room and keeping room for the positive so that that yin and yang could stay together, that's when we begin to see the downfall and the detriment, when we have these cultures that are so consumed with strip clubs and illegal drugs and everything else, to the diminishment, to the abasement of us. We're going back to the animalistic as opposed to ascending to those files of the air, the higher consciousness that we were given dominion over. We were given dominion over the animalistic, those baser chakras, but we also know that we are in the process of elevation as we let that Kundalini energy rise up to our crown consciousness, into our heart, and then into our crown. That allows us to have self-actualization, when we can truly know ourselves and to express ourselves in the highest forms instead of just being consistently in that lower form, the lower vibrations. The beats are dope, the beats are ill, but we also have to have the consciousness and the messages that go with it as well to complete the picture. That's what so much of our life is about, is finding that balance, the masculine and the feminine, the yin and the yang, the left and the right brains. And that's what we seek to empower our people with, these messages of encouragement, with these messages of inspiration, these urban inspirational metaphysics, so that we can level up, we can rise up to our greatest potential, as opposed to staying down there and playing in the minor leagues. We can raise up to the majors. We see that possibility as so by looking at ourselves in our truest light, as divine beings having a human experience, as opposed to being the phrase, I'm only human, which allows us to make excuses and not take responsibility for creating the possibilities that are infinite and out there and waiting for us to step into them. And that's what we'll talk about consistently on this channel. Self-mastery, how we step into our greatest possibilities. So tune in with me. Join me on this journey as I develop and, discover and reveal more of myself. Like Fred Hampton always said, I am a revolutionary. I want to often chant and say that I am a revelationary. I am revealing more of the Christ within, more of the divinity that was within. So that as I recognize my divinity and you recognize yours, we can meet each other on that level, and that we can have those conversations and that kind of discourse where we're looking at each other with respect, with optimism, with positivity, and not in competing, not seeing lack and limitation, and that I get something, it stops you from getting yours. If you get something, you diminish my opportunity to get mine. No, there's possibility for us all. And that's what we want to look at and encourage here, that the power for manifestation, the power for living that abundant life that Jesus said, I came that they may have life and have it more abundantly. We're not talking about just existing. We want to thrive, and the possibility is there. And that's what we like to encourage our people to see, the possibility that is inherent within us. Minister Imhotep, join me here on this channel. Join me. If you like what I'm saying, subscribe. Like it, hit the like button, subscribe. If not, if you have thoughts, different opinions, share them in the comments so that we can create this discourse, so that we can have conversations, so that we can come to mutual agreements. Well, we may not even ever agree, but at least we may come to understanding. Minister Imhotep, and I'm out. Peace and abundant blessings as you step into your divinity. Reveal the Christ within you. Think a new thought about who you are